old organization that has been around since 1965, Ann Arbor, Michigan based, working on issues of racial and economic justice and addressing the root causes of violence of various kinds, including structural violence from oppression, poverty, environmental devastation, patriarchy, war. Our Latin America Caucus specifically looks at issues in and concerning Latin America, and we try to raise awareness of these social justice issues and also of the role that U.S. policy plays and what we can do from the United States to promote social justice and human rights and peace in Latin America. So we have been having a speaker series once a month for 5 months, and this is the final event in the series. We're very fortunate to have, and I see from the chat that Marianne is quite a fan club. Marianne Perrone is one of our very own Latin America Caucus members and a very long time activist and educator working on issues of human rights in Latin America for more than 30 years. She has a particular interest in Honduras and has taken a number of trips, over a dozen trips, since the 2009 military coup there to Honduras as part of various delegations, including School of the Americas Watch delegations and Share Foundation delegations, which she'll no doubt be talking more about, most recently in December of 2021. This speaker series is organized by the Latin America Caucus of ICPJ and also co-sponsored by Latin American and Caribbean Studies at the University of Michigan and the Wayne State University Center for Latino, Latina, and Latin American Studies, as well as the Huron Valley Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, and we're very happy to have their sponsorship. The talk this evening is entitled "The Struggle for Environmental, Racial, and Human Rights in Honduras." And Marianne will be sharing her experience and expertise on that subject. It's a very timely subject. Some of you who may have been following the news from that country will know that the former president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, was extradited recently to the United States, where he will face criminal charges for drug trafficking, firearms charges, and others. Hopefully a good precedent for former presidents in the United States as well. Honduras is setting an example for us. The people of Honduras have been in resistance ever since that 2009 military coup, and it's a long struggle and sometimes has seemed daunting, but the fact that there is progress and that the wife of the ousted president, Xiomara Castro, just took office in January of this year as the new president and is hopefully ushering in a new chapter in Honduran history, is a sign that grassroots struggle makes a difference. It used to be said that Honduras was a country that was too poor to have an oligarchy, but sadly, there's no country that's too poor for the greedy, wealthy, and powerful to seize what's not theirs and to exploit and oppress everyone else. So we'll be hearing more about that subject. I'm Rich Stoller-Schulk, one of the members of the Latin America Caucus. We have several other members of the caucus here who can introduce themselves, and then we'll turn things over to Marianne. So Rebecca, do you want to start?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Canner, and I will be facilitating questions after. So if you have any questions while Marianne's talking, you can get them in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function after she finishes. Jen?
Hi, Jennifer JB, member of the caucus, and glad to have you all here. Thank you so much for coming, and I keep your eyes in the chat also to see any links that we'll put forward, whether it's about ICPJ in general or on our talk. Thank you.
Well, I guess that leaves me. I am also a member of the caucus, and I will begin now by just thanking Rich for that very complete introduction to both myself and to the topic. And I am going to be sharing my screen because I'm going to show images today that go along with what I have to share with you. So let me get that up. But first, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Here in Michigan, it's a very warm, beautiful evening. And who wants to sit and look at Zoom again? So thank you for doing that. And I know that there are people here from far away as Nicaragua. Hello, Joe, and California and other places. So, and I know some people are here because they know a lot about Honduras, and there are some who know very little, and I hope that I can make things comprehensible for everyone. So I'm going to try this share screen thing. Can everyone see my screen? Yes. Okay. Then I can start talking to you. And when we first started setting up this speaker series early last fall, none of us could have imagined what would happen between then and now in Honduras. As Rich said, this is the title on the screen of what we thought was important, and we will talk about that tonight. But with all the changes in Honduras, if I were to title this today, I think I would call it A New Moment in Honduras. I have given many talks over the past 13 years on Honduras, and some of you may have heard one of those. And the findings shared in those talks have been pretty grim, as have been the realities on the ground there, and still are, and likely will continue for some time to come. But there is definitely new hope in Honduras today, and I'm happy to be able to share that with you all tonight. My own history with Honduras goes back to those 13 years mentioned and parallels the history of the military coup in 2009 that overthrew the democratically elected president and installed an illegitimate government whose backers have been in power ever since that time. As Rich said, I've been to Honduras many, many times in those years, and I have been there on delegations. I've also, on a couple of occasions, been able to offer accompaniment to human rights defenders there. I've been doing what I can to keep up with some of the great movement that has happened in these last 5 months since I was last there in December. And it seems like every day something significant is happening in Honduras. So tonight I will try to bring you some of the spirit of the new moment, as well as the history leading up to this moment in time. We will look at what the people are currently facing in terms of their struggle for environmental, racial, and human rights. And we will look at the relationship with the United States government in this new moment, as well as the need for continued international solidarity from the grassroots, which is us. We're the grassroots here in the US, and how we can be a part of helping to promote change. For anyone who needs a refresher, this is a map of Central America, and you see Honduras there in the middle. It's one of the larger countries in Central America. Honduras is a very diverse, very beautiful, first of all, and diverse in biodiversity country, and it's very rich in natural resources and rich in diverse cultures and peoples. So the new moment, which includes both good news and bad news. I was tempted to give you a chronological timeline of what has been happening in Honduras from the coup until now. But instead, I'm going to start with the joyous punchline of the new moment in 4 parts. And Rich has already given you a bit of a reveal for that. This man is Juan Orlando Hernandez, and he will be referred to as Hernandez or Ho. His initials are J-O-H, and in Spanish that's pronounced Ho. You will see and hear Ho often, or the Hernandez regime, and that's who we're talking about. So Ho was an architect of the coup of 2009, and he was an illegitimately elected president and narco dictator who was in the presidency from 2014 to 2022. On November 30th, just this last November, all he represented was overwhelmingly voted out of office. After having rigged and stolen his 2 terms in office, he was poised to remain in power by being behind the scenes, and a crony from his party was to ascend the presidency. But the Honduran people, in the highest voter turnout in Honduras history, so massively voted for the opposition that even the machinery of election stealers that has worked so well so many times could not claim victory. So that's the first thing that happened. He's out of office and his party is out of office. The second wonderful thing is on January 27th, Xiomara Castro, the Libre Party candidate, a woman, very notably, and the spouse of the previous president, Mel Zelaya, who was deposed in the 2009 coup, was inaugurated as the president of Honduras. It was a historic election and a peaceful transfer of power that no one really saw coming or would have believed that it would be possible. And then what happened on February 15th is that Ho was surrounded by national police and DEA agents at his residence and taken into custody with the warrant of extradition from the United States for narco trafficking. He was 2 months in custody in Honduras. And again, I don't know that anyone believed that that would actually hold. But fourth movement in the new moment, on April 21st, not even a month ago, Ho was successfully extradited to the US, where he is in jail. A plane on that day with 6 DEA agents landed at the Honduras airport, and an hour later, they left with Ho on board their way to New York, where he will face trial. He has become the 33rd Honduran extradited to the United States. Hondurans very much celebrated his departure. What did the US Attorney General Merrick B. Garland say about the extradition? This is a quote. Hernandez is charged with participating in a corrupt and violent drug trafficking conspiracy to facilitate the importation of tons of cocaine into the United States from 2004 to 2022. As is charged in the indictment, Hernandez abused his position as president of Honduras from 2014 through 2022 to operate the country as a narco state, end quote. The people of Honduras have been calling Ho a narco dictator for a very long time. And who would have thought that a high-ranking person in the United States government would agree with them? So this is all really good news for Honduras. The dictator is gone, a new progressive president in office. The Honduran people are celebrating both the new president and the extradition of Ho. They're celebrating, but they're also organizing. It is really a tremendous cause for celebration. The slogan throughout Hernandez's presidency was "Fuera Ho," out with Ho. And now they are jubilantly saying, "Ya se fue," he is gone. And there is a lot of new hope for change with the Xiomara Castro government. So that's the good news, and it really is. But even though Ho is gone, the criminal structure he built over all of those years still remains and needs to be dismantled. The reality is that the people of Honduras have lived in what they have called an anti-democratic, cruel narco dictatorship for the past 13 and a half years. And no part of life in Honduras, no institution, large or small, governmental or otherwise, has been left untouched. Every aspect of daily life, civil life, economic life, social life, and survival of human life has been profoundly impacted by the policies and practice of this government. Even though Ho is gone, a great toll has been levied on the poor, the indigenous, the Afro-Hondurans, women, human rights defenders, and the environment, as well as on democracy in Honduras. A short list of what these past 13 years have brought. A thoroughly corrupting of the Supreme Court and the justice system, increased militarism and militarization of police, brutal repression of peaceful protests defending democracy, especially after the coup and the stolen elections, including excessive tear gassing, live fire into crowds, and targeted assassination. The criminalization of peaceful protests, throwing people into jail to decapitate the leadership of social movements. The looting of state coffers and institutions, for example, the national health system. The targeting of LGBTQ communities, including criminalizing them, forced disappearance and targeted assassinations of dozens of LGBTQ community members. An increase in femicide with nearly impunity for any offenders committing domestic violence or state violence against women. Declaring Honduras is open for business right after the coup, and then granting so many concessions for extractive industries, mining, hydroelectric dam projects, and tourism. By the end of 2021, 545 mining concessions had been granted in Honduras. And then there was the dismantling of the United Nations mission of support against corruption, known as MASI, that had been working to call out and prosecute governmental corruption in Honduras, but Ho dismantled it. Distributing state money to cronies and backers, bankrupting the nation, leaving Honduras deep in debt as the new president takes office. And then there are the ZEDES, ZEDES, an acronym for so-called Employment and Economic Development Zones. These represent a particularly terrible blow against sovereignty of the nation of Honduras. Large swaths of Honduran territory are to become autonomous model cities given over to private enterprise, domestic and usually international, to govern and exploit them as they see fit, not subject to any of the laws of the nation or any other laws, only the ones they make. And of course, last thing that I will mention on this is the migration in record numbers, with people forced to leave the country, breaking up families, communities, and draining the country of their youth. We all know that one man, as destructive as Ho has been, does not determine everything alone. A whole system is in place with all of the forces that supported him and benefited from his way of governing, still now ready to create any obstacles they possibly can to get back to business as usual in Honduras. Powerful interests, including a small but very rich elite, the oligarchy that Rich referred to, along with other narco traffickers, are used to calling the shots and do not want to see the change that the people are demanding and expecting of the Xiomara government. Carlos H. Reyes, he's a longtime labor and social movement leader way back from the 1980s with a whole other history of US and interference in Honduras. He analyzed the repercussions of the extradition of Juan Orlando Hernandez to the United States for the Hondurans. And he said that extraditing Juan Orlando to stand trial and face a life sentence in prison, is compensation in part for all of the harm he caused. But he said all of the social, economic, and political damages placed President Xiomara Castro in a dangerous position because Hernandez left the country bankrupt and with a heap of problems. He noted that Ho was extradited and will be tried for drug trafficking, not for corruption and crimes against democracy in his own country. And he said, Honduras itself needs courts with honorable people so that these crimes are punished here instead of saying who should be taken away. What has to be confronted in Honduras is a dictatorial structure. It has to be dismantled, and that means removing those people and dismantling the system of impunity, end quote. So that's the bad news. It will take a lot to dismantle the monster or mess that has been created. On the other hand, here's another piece of good news. From the time of the coup in 2009 to the present, the social movements of Honduras have risen up, developed, become strengthened, and more savvy and more united. 13 years of oppression is an amazing learning environment. The social movements are determined and mobilized and ready. They are young and old, they are indigenous and Black, they are campesinos and campesinas, urban dwellers, they are environmentalists and labor organizers, and they are ready for change. They realize that all of their struggles are related to each other's struggles, all part of one struggle for justice and equality and the earth. They have no illusions about how the governmental machinery might work or not in their favor even now. But they do rejoice that a woman is president. In Honduras, women have only had the vote since 1957. So I'm going to take you a little deeper into the struggles of these social movements. And just to say that everywhere I've gone, anytime we have gathered, we are always greeted with a circle of living things and symbols of working for change, for the earth and for the people. And as I said already, but it bears repeating, there is in the social movements a profound sense of the intersectionality of human rights, indigenous rights, racial rights, and environmental rights. So in that spirit, I'd like to introduce you to some people. I have 3 groups or individuals that I'd like you to meet and hear their stories. Meet Porfirio Soto Cedillo, Jose Avelino Cedillo, Orbin Naun Hernandez, Kevin Alejandro Romero, Arnold, Javier Aleman, Ever Alexander Cedillo, Daniel Marquez, y Jeremías Martinez Diaz. They are called the Guapinol 8, but I wanted you to hear their names and know that they each have a family and a community. They are also known collectively as water defenders in their area of Honduras. We visited them in prison in July and then again in December. You see us waiting to get in. We met in the inner courtyard and they filed themselves in to be with us. These were very emotional meetings, a unique event for them to get 25 international visitors. We heard from them how hard it has been for them to spend over 2.5 years in jail in pre-trial detention, which is against the judicial norms and against Honduran law. But we also heard of their resolute commitment to protect the vital rivers in their area from a toxic iron oxide mining project, which is to protect the source of life for their communities and for our planet. We also visited with their families in their community and with the whole community. The mining project they are protesting is run by a company called Inversiones Los Pinales, a company owned by the largest landowner in Honduras. This company was given concessions for mining with no community consultation, which is required by Honduran law. The mining is happening inside of a national park, a protected area by Honduran law. In this park are the headwaters of several rivers, including the Guapinol River, which is the source of drinking water for 42,000 people. In 2018, the development of the mine began to contaminate the water for 14 nearby communities. This is Juan Lopez, a leader and a catechist at a Jesuit parish and community center in Tocoa, nearby. He and other community members and leaders organized with the people a camp in defense of water and life within the national park to peacefully protest the mining operation and the unlawful permission the government had given it to operate. In October of 2018, 1,500 Honduran military and police violently attacked the camp and evicted all who were on site. Security forces used excessive amounts of tear gas, live ammunition, and they beat protesters. The following morning, the protesters returned again to the camp, and the security forces used the same methods to break up the protests, this time following protesters home, where excessive use of tear gas and gunfire continued. The Guapinol 8 were detained nearly 3 years ago for being part of this peaceful protest encampment. Despite repeated calls for the release of the 8 men, including by the UN Commission on Human Rights, last fall, the Honduran Supreme Court extended their pretrial detention period for an additional 6 months. There is no substantiated evidence against the Guapinol water defenders. The accusations are fabricated and have served to repress the legitimate resistance movement. These 8 all innocent men were illegally held in prison in pretrial detention for nearly 2.5 years. This follows a familiar and growing pattern in the region. Extreme abuses by authorities trigger widespread indignation and protests. Legitimate human rights defenders and community leaders are then targeted by the authorities, not because they participated in the criminal action, but because they have been known for their work in the legitimate defense of fundamental rights. The Honduran justice system notoriously serves political agendas. These water defenders and their families are victims of political persecution. While we were there in December, their long-awaited trial began. Many delays ensued, and for those of us watching some of the proceedings, it was clear that the prosecution did not make a credible case. Their witnesses contradicted each other and even themselves in testimony on different days. No credible evidence against the men was shown. In her speech at her inauguration in January, President Xiomara Castro called for the Guapinol 8's release, which was a great boost for the international campaign to free them. After many delays, it wasn't until February 9th, 2022 that the trial concluded. 6 of the Guapinol 8 were found guilty in a verdict described as outrageous by Amnesty International. Then, unexpectedly, the next day, the Supreme Court issued a judgment accepting appeals filed a year earlier that challenged the constitutionality of the charges and the pretrial detention, therefore giving an order that would free them. They're very happy here. However, it still took 14 days with a lot of foot dragging and then another ruling by the National Court of Appeals to close the case, and the local courts finally released the remaining 6. This was a great victory. So much attention had to go internationally and nationally to seeking the release of these men. And it happened. Yet the illegal mining in the national park continues. The struggle continues daily, as does danger for protesters and defenders of the water. And now I'd like you to meet the Garifuna 4 and their community. In July, we also visited a Garifuna community in the northern coastal area, a highly biodiverse area. The Garifuna are an Afro-Indigenous people descended from Arawaks and Africans. Their ancestral territory spans the Caribbean border of Central America, which they have inhabited for over 200 years. We met with a couple of interim leaders of the community called Triunfo de la Cruz, Triumph of the Cross. They are interim leaders because 1 year ago, 5 men in their community, including the president of their community, Snyder Centeno, shown here, had been forcibly disappeared in the night by men wearing bulletproof vests and whose vehicles had markings of police units. They have not been seen since. The community has been in a struggle ever since a Canadian tourism company came and has threatened, forcefully bought and or stolen their ancestral land and beaches, threatening their livelihoods and their lives. These interests are building tourist meccas and gated communities for the Canadians and Americans. Snyder's whereabouts remain unknown, along with the 4 others. Since their abductions, suspicious unmarked vehicles have been spotted driving into the community several times. A new report by Global Witness says that Honduras was the most dangerous country per capita in 2019 for environmental defenders. Killings rose from 4 in 2018 to 14 last year. At least 17 Garifuna people were killed in 2019. Here with Snyder is Miriam Miranda, a very important coordinator of OFRANE, which is the organization of the Garifuna people in Honduras. And these are her words. In the last few years, we have counted 50 assassinations, 50, of Garifuna people and dozens of cases of legal persecution. Meanwhile, our young people are abandoning their communities in droves as a result of the violence, persecution, and lack of healthy living conditions. She goes on to say, we're in a very serious situation because the state is made up of a corrupt, murderous, criminal political class. Not only does that put us at more risk, but it makes this fight very difficult. We're swimming against the current. She, of course, said that before Ho was out of office. And I would say that the Garifuna people now are only cautious, as are all of the social movements, only cautiously optimistic for the new government. In the Garifuna territories, the aggressions escalated even more after, in 2015, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights gave down a ruling that declared that the Honduran state had violated the American Convention on Human Rights by refusing to recognize and respect the autonomy of ancestral Garifuna land and brutalizing the community as it attempted to protect their territory. The ruling from the Inter-American Court demanded the Honduran state take back land that had been appropriated by outsiders for massive tourist projects and return it to its rightful owners, the Garifuna community. It's been over 5 years. By now, it's been over 6 years, and the Honduran state still hasn't complied with the ruling. Instead, it continues to coordinate with the criminal structures to disappear, persecute, and murder Garifuna leaders as a result. And Triunfo de la Cruz is one of those disputed communities in the ruling. So that Snyder Centeno was among the community voices that heavily pressured the state to obey the 2015 court ruling. Centeno, along with other community members, also intervened against people involved with the deforestation of mangroves and other highly biodiverse zones in the region. OFRANE, which is the Black Fraternal Organization of Honduras, is last year's recipient of the Letelier Moffitt Human Rights Award, awarded annually by the Washington, D.C.-based Institute for Policy Studies. It's awarded to those advancing the cause of human rights in the Americas. Miriam Miranda and others received the award just this past October in Washington, D.C. Perhaps the best known human rights defender, Berta Cáceres. I'd like you to meet her now. This is a photo of Berta with Padre Melo. Padre Melo is a Jesuit priest. He's the executive director of Radio Progreso, which is a radio station and also a research and analysis organization called ERIC in El Progreso, Honduras. He is a national and international voice for the people in Honduras. And he and Berta Cáceres were very good friends. Meet Berta. Many of you already know her. For those who don't, she was born into the indigenous Lenca community in the area of La Esperanza, Honduras, where subsistence is precarious. A university-educated mother of 3 daughters, Berta became involved early on in the struggle to protect the environment, so intricately linked to her people's survival. While still a student, she founded a movement called COPIN, the Civic Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras, bringing people together to address the growing threats posed to Lenca communities by illegal logging and to organize the fight for their territorial rights and to improve their livelihoods. In 2006, Berta began to lead efforts to oppose a huge hydroelectric dam project financed by multinational corporations that was planned along the Gualcarque River in Lenca territory. The Lenca people know in their bones what we must learn. Water is life. Water is life and water is sacred. In their cosmology, the river is sacred in and of itself, but it is also sacred because it gives them their survival, their source of food and drinking water. This dam would desiccate the river and render life impossible for the communities along it. It would be an environmental disaster of devastating proportions for the people who literally live from the river. As we've heard earlier, it is required by Honduran law that in order to build such a project, the affected communities must be consulted beforehand and must agree to allow the project to go forward. These communities were not consulted at all. Berta and her organization filed complaints, lodged appeals, and organized protests to force proper consultation. She became known as La Guardián de los Ríos, the guardian of the rivers. With the years of increasing public pressure by Berta and Copin against the dam, the largest multinational company backed out of the deal, leaving the dam project in the hands of the Honduran Partner Corporation. And then came the intimidation by the Honduran military, and then the death threats. Berta was constantly hounded and harassed, and her family feared for her life. Protective measures, such as were possible, were taken. In 2015, Berta was awarded a prestigious environmental award, the Goldman Environmental Prize, given annually to honor the achievements of grassroots activists from around the world who inspire all of us to take action to protect our planet. With this international acknowledgement and attention, the hope was that winning the prize would afford Berta some protection from those that threatened her life. But in the early morning hours on March 2nd, 2016, just a year after receiving her award, Berta was assassinated in her own home by a group of men later found to have ties to both the company building the dam and the country's military. Berta was 45 years old. Berta is not alone in her struggle, nor in her eventual fate. She is joined by thousands of people across Honduras who are moving together to protect the natural resources and the sources of life for their people and our planet. A saying became part of the culture shortly after Berta's assassination. Berta no se murió, se multiplicó. Berta didn't die, she multiplied. The struggle continues. Since the coup in 2009, almost 30% of Honduran land has been earmarked by mining concessions by multinational corporations. This type of mining involves the use of cyanide, arsenic, and mercury, threatening the rivers that serve countless communities across the nation. The many hydroelectric dam projects that are planned are not to produce electrical energy for nearby communities, but to give cheap energy for the mining operations. Many communities of people already living on the margins of subsistence are facing the death of their rivers, their source of life. Some of these communities have already suffered the devastating consequences of dams that have been built, drying out their river and their land, and of the mines that have begun operations poisoning their water. But we also visited several that are in the process of resisting the mines and the dams with all their hearts, as Berta did. They face the same obstacles that she did, often threatened by the military and police who are working closely with the corporations rather than protecting the people. Berta Cáceres was not the first nor the last environmental activist or human rights defender to be killed in Honduras, which is now known as the deadliest place to defend the planet. Well over 120 environmental activists have been murdered in Honduras since 2010. And again, the entrenched interests in extractive industries, both Honduran and international, are still using brutal tactics and targeted assassinations. Last week, on May 3rd, a Garifuna environmental defender and community leader, Alonso Salgado, was killed, and a colleague, Suri Quintanilla, was left gravely injured in the same attack in her home. On April 30th, just over a week ago, Justo Benitez Sanchez, a Lenca indigenous leader and defender of environmental and human rights, was assassinated in a similar way by armed men invading his own home. Yet the people continue protesting, proclaiming that water is life. They said to us, "We are aware of the risks, but we are clear we must continue." At her inauguration, in a show of solidarity with Berta Cáceres and her legacy and support for indigenous and environmental movements, as Xiomara walked through the crowd, she went directly to Berta's daughter, Bertita Zuniga, who is now in leadership of COPIN, and accepted from Bertita the Vara Atalenca. You see that pole there. It's a sacred symbol of the Lenca and other indigenous peoples. This was COPIN's statement on this gesture. In this way, the indigenous and Black Hondurans give President Xiomara Castro the commitment to accompany the historic struggle for the just causes and to liberate the territories from looting, corruption, and exploitation. So back to what's happening in the new moment. All of these things are still happening in the new moment. But what has changed since Xiomara took office? These are just a few things of note that I can share. First of all, the Guapinol 8 have been freed, and that is a great thing. Would it have happened had she not been elected president? Had the other party won the election? I don't know. I don't know how much her intervention, but they are freed. It has happened. Then there is the sedes. You remember these protected zones that were to be given away to corporations and political and economic elites to govern as they would like. President Xiomara signed the repeal of the legal framework for the sedes, these model cities. And she says, quote, "Today is the most important day of the 88 days of my administration. Returning sovereignty to the country was an unavoidable commitment we had with history. I can tell the Honduran people that mission accomplished. I sanctioned the decree that repeals the Zede law." That's a great thing. There are many steps yet to have it dismantled. So nothing can be taken for granted, but that step was taken by her and by Congress. Xiomara administration has been working to address the culture and crime of corruption. Remember that there was a UN commission called the MASI that had been trying to be working, and that was dismantled by Ho. They are now actively working, the administration, to reconstitute the anti-corruption mission of the UN. And just on May 8th, an exploratory commission from the UN arrived in Honduras. There is a lot going on in the energy sector with that has been thoroughly captivated by Ho and his cronies and privatized and all kinds of things. I am not an expert on that, but there's been a lot of movement. There is much more in motion. There's literally something new every day. She has now been in office for 100 days. And so there have been several different reports that have come out on what her first 100 days have been. And as you might expect, they have included some kudos, some campaign promises kept, and some disappointments. So we're very much in a wait and see what is going to be possible and what will be allowed. And why do I say allowed? And this is where we turn to the role of the United States in all of this. And I'm going to turn to this graphic that I have made for myself quite a while ago to help explain and show graphically what has happened in Honduras. And you've heard about most of it already, but I draw your attention to the inner piece that should be a circle, but has been squeezed. And that represents the richness of Honduras, the land and the rivers and the forests, the rich human resources and biodiversity, and the martyrs. And glowing there, the resistance to injustice and oppression and militarism. And that's what should be covering the whole page, but it has just, that life force has been squeezed by the things in the surrounding circle, all of which we've talked about, everything from the loss of land and water to poverty and displacement and violence and impunity, extreme economic inequality, squeezing them. But what created that circle? And then we go to the outer circle and we see the vicious cycle of violence and corruption that feeds off each other. You see the 4 arrows that are the basis for it. The military and the militarized police upholding the political usurpation, including the coup and stolen elections, and that the relationship with the transnational corporations and the extractive industries and agribusiness, and all part of a neoliberal economic model. And holding it all up, the foundation underneath, we see US political support and security aid for the military and the militarized police, which keep this whole vicious cycle going. The United States was the only country in all of the Americas to legitimize those that overthrew the elected president in 2009, and has continued to support the de facto governments of Honduras. The United States accepted the results of the patently fraudulent re-election of Ho in 2017. Our tax dollars, yours and mine, have continued to fund, train, and arm the Honduran military and police that have been implicated in the violations of human rights and murders of protesters, including Berta Cáceres. 3 people arrested for the Cáceres killing were US-trained Honduran special forces. A United Nations report asserts that the Honduran police and military used excessive and lethal force against post-election protesters in 2017. Since the coup in 2009, the US has given increasing millions of dollars in security assistance to Honduras's military and police, even after the Honduran government was implicated in massive corruption scandals and high-profile political assassinations. With all of the drama and news of the extradition of Ho unfolding, this is the untold story. The United States supported the coup and Ho and his policies every step of the way until his arrest. Back to Carlos Reyes, the labor and social movement leader. He says, the United States is responsible for the harm that Ho inflicted on us. The United States is responsible for the damages that occurred because the United States ordered that he remain in power, saying that he resolved criminality and that Honduras was no longer a narco state. This all having an enormous impact. He goes on to say, the gringos are spoon feeding us gruel, leaving us with enormous damage and saying that aid is coming, investments are coming, after leaving a huge mess. Juan Orlando did not act alone. There was a mafia of military, police, judges, and other figures that were part of the mafia, he said. What has to be confronted in Honduras is a dictatorial structure. It has to be dismantled, and that means removing those people and dismantling the system of impunity. And the United States has supported that structure and the system of impunity. So, a little bit of current history. There have been, again, before Xiomara took office, there have been and are 3 bills in the House and in the Senate. And you can see them here, the Senate bill and 2 House bills, one named after Berta Cáceres, all calling for an end to US military and militarized police aid to Honduras that has helped hold up these terrible structures. The social movements are still asking us to use these bills as a way to advocate for change in US policy. Even though there's a new president, a new regime, they're asking that we continue to do that. In other news on the US side, after 5 years without an ambassador, a new ambassador to Honduras has been named and has begun work. Laura Farnsworth Dogu. I think that's how we pronounce her last name, D-O-G-U. And that is she. Another amazing thing that happened, thanks to Witness for Peace and SOA Watch, and I think some other groups, in March, just a month or so ago, a US congressional delegation led by Ilan Omar, but including Cori Bush, Chuy Garcia, Jamal Bowman, and an aide to Representative Jan Schakowsky, went to Honduras and to El Salvador and Guatemala to look at the picture in Central America. And unlike any other usual congressional delegations, they met with the grassroots and with social movements, as well as with government officials. And the recommendations are to come very soon. They wanted to wait until they had a chance to do some things, and they will be putting them out. But they did say, and I wanted to share this piece. They said, in Honduras, we witnessed cautious optimism as newly elected President Castro and her administration worked to uproot corruption and defend human rights. They go on to say that it's not that good of a picture in Guatemala or El Salvador. And talking about the whole region, they said, while we were overcome by people's experiences of repression, criminalization, disenfranchisement, and persecution, we were also struck by the parallels between their struggles and those our own communities face in the United States. We return home determined and energized to advocate for a rights-based US policy at home and abroad. They also, once again, this is not advancing. They also, this congressional delegation went to Berta Cáceres' tomb. So we return again to how can we be in solidarity? What are some US policy actions? Number one, you can read these to yourself, but to write to senators and congresspeople to stop the US funding of the military, to stop intervening and respect sovereignty of Honduras and use the 3 bills as vehicles. The other thing that is asked is to ask Congress to call for the cancellation of the debt incurred by Ho during the dictatorship. Most of the debt was incurred by him borrowing for projects that never took place. But the money is gone in his coffers and those of his cronies. And once again, to stay tuned for very specific advocacy coming out of that congressional delegation. That's going to be important. And we do have your email addresses, and we would, once that happens, I will try to send out to you what some of those asks are at that time. So we're going to move to our last thing, which is the milpa, and another note of hope. And we're going to end on a note of hope, which will be wonderful to do. Just as a precursor to that, on top of everything else you heard, like the rest of the world, COVID came to Honduras. But soon after that, 2 hurricanes hit them, Eta and Iota. So the health and economic hardships were intense with both COVID and the hurricanes, on top of all the other grave injustice perpetrated. And so the people were growing even hungrier and malnutrition was setting in. And if we fast forward to today, the United Nations World Food Program warned just last Tuesday, a week ago, about worsening food insecurity in Honduras, a situation that affects 2.6 million people in the country. I heard just today that an estimated 2 to 6 million people will be in a food security crisis and emergency from April to August of this year. That's what is projected. So in solidarity with those needs, we began through the Share Foundation some immediate relief efforts during COVID, even while we recognize the longer term need to work systemically on root causes of hunger. Through working with partners in Honduras via Padre Mello and Radio Progreso, the Vamos a la Milpa effort was born. And this is a grassroots effort toward homegrown food sovereignty and food security for the people most in need. In the United States, we mobilized to support this effort, and various groups in Honduras began to organize and to plant. These photos are from our July delegation, where we got to witness the first planting season of these efforts. I hope as I scroll through, you will see the joy that this has brought to many different communities, both rural and urban, large and small, as they learn to plant and cultivate using sustainable organic practices in community. Others are from our visit in December to see the harvest of the first milpa season. I'll go back for that one. Oops, that didn't work either. Let's see where we are. La milpa literally refers to corn or a cornfield, and it also means the life-giving spirit of the earth and community. It means sustainability, fruitfulness, life itself. In this case, the milpa is also an act of resistance, resisting monocultural, destructive agribusiness, and resisting one's own dependence upon the agro-industrial food corporations in order to feed your family. It is organizing together in communities, mobilizing to regain access to the land that has been usurped and to find spaces to grow food in the urban barrios. Scott Wright said, "Hope is really the most subversive dimension of this solidarity effort. Vamos a la Milpa is accompanying the Honduran people in defending and protecting that hope, symbolically by helping families plant their milpas, but even more by defending their right to organize in social movements to reclaim their right to their sacred lands and sacred waters." This says, Mother Earth, our common home. Let's defend her. So again, what can we do? You can join the milpa. We are having another delegation in December of this year. I'm giving you plenty of time to decide to sign up and go. Be in touch with me for any questions about that. But what else can you do to help others to know what's going on and to become part of undoing of some of the harm our country has caused there? You could organize a house party or a Zoom event. We have a beautiful 20-minute video on Vamos a la Milpa, and it's really effective. I kind of wanted to show it tonight, but I would have taken even more of your time. You can invite a speaker. I'm available to come to your class, your organization, your congregation, even your living room. Share is taking always financial contributions to the Vamos a la Milpa effort. It buys the seeds. They're trying very much to use local non-GMO and original seeds and tools, and in some cases even land, so that people can grow their own food. And I repeat once again as our last thing to call and write to Congress and the State Department regarding the security aid. Let them know that people are thinking about Honduras, they care, and that you know that these are the reasons why people are coming over our border, who are risking their lives and leaving their families because it became so untenable, and that we want different kind of policy from the administration here in the United States toward Honduras. And I leave you there because we all do it for the children, right? That's our, that's the future. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Mary Ann, for that very powerful, wonderful presentation. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot to do. So with that, Rebecca is going to field questions and comments and get us started with some conversation.
All right, so remember, I'm looking at the chat, and if you also want to ask a question yourself, you can use the raise hand function. So the first question we got was early on in your talk, Mary Ann. Ann asked, in general, has the US long repressed Central and Latin America, especially if we believe, we being the US, a nation there is going into socialism, which we seem to despise? Again, the we is the United States government.
Yes, we have long oppressed most of the nations in Latin America, and certainly in Central America, if I heard the question right. You know, to go back, Honduras itself was, I think, the first country that kind of got named the Banana Republic. And that was very early in the last century. And yes, we have always used our military might and our political will and our economic systems to intervene, interfere, and oppress in Latin America.
And then Nancy asked, are the 8 men and their families safe, or could they find themselves in the same situation? What's being done to help stop the mine from polluting the water?
Yeah, yes, they are at home in their community with their families, but absolutely. The owner of the mine is part of the family of the richest man in Honduras, and he owns so much of Honduras and controls so much of what goes on there. That family does, that they are not going to go quietly into the night. And so those particular men and many others are in danger. They're in danger of forced disappearance and assassination, and certainly other threats. I have not heard of any particular threats against their lives since they have been out, but that doesn't mean that there haven't been. So one of the things that we can do, and that I would suggest, is to write to the State Department, to our new ambassador. I mean, this is kind of an opportunity just to let them know that you know about the Guapinol 8 and that you care about them, their families, the other water defenders there, and about the mine itself, that it's a crime against humanity, really, to poison those waters. It's not every country in in Central America does not have the kind of rivers that Honduras has. El Salvador has one viable river left. So this is for everyone, not just for the Hondurans. So yeah.
Okay, Rich asks, why do you think the US finally decided to sacrifice Ho after backing the narco dictatorship for so long? And how are they working to thwart progressive change under Xiomara besides military aid?
Well, I wish I knew all of the answers to both of those questions, but to start with the first, why did they stop backing Ho? Why did they finally do that? I wish I knew. I can surmise that that perhaps it was the election with the really overwhelming. I was there in July. I asked a lot about the election, not that I'm that interested in elections, but I knew I would be coming back here, and it's something people would ask about. They'd say, well, isn't there going to be a presidential election in November? And I wanted to hear what the people were saying. And the people didn't have much to say. They said, oh, same thing's going to happen. There's no possibility of having, because they went all out in 2017. They went all out, and they won, but it was stolen right out from under them, which is a whole story in itself. So they said the same thing's going to happen. He's not going to allow anyone else to win. It's not. And I thought there would be not a good turnout, but there was massive. And as I said, they just couldn't. And maybe seeing that, and maybe his narco trafficking had become so incredibly visible and horrible that they decided he was a liability, but somehow they did. What I would like to ask, and I'm going to find some ways to do that, is what is their explanation now for, there was Merrick Garland calling him a narco dictator and calling it a narco state. Well, who's going to answer for us having, who in the United States is going to answer for us? I knew that in 2009 that was going on. And I don't have any of the access or intelligence of the CIA or anyone else. How come they didn't know all along that he was a narco dictator? So that's that piece of it. And I forget the second part. What was the second part, Rebecca?
The second part was, how is the US working to thwart progressive change?
Well, it's an interesting question. And this is what worries me. You might remember that our vice president has been tasked with kind of seeing to the policies in Central America, as was Biden when he was the vice president. And he didn't do a very good job. He went right along the same lines. And one of the first things that she said when she took on this task, she said very proudly that she had just talked with some Japanese business people who might really be interested in investing in Honduras. And she thought that was good news. And, I'm not an economist, and I am sure that Honduras could use some help with investment, but it's just more of the same. It's international investment for the stockholders, for the bottom line. It's for them these corporations to get as much as they can out of Honduras and put in their own coffers. And so I think the economic, the promising, and the thing that they've been saying forever, what's going to create more jobs, and it never does create more jobs, and it never does bring up the development of peoples and contribute to health, education, and welfare. So I think it will be the economic piece that will happen. They will play nice and try to help. And I think, again, I'm not as savvy, and maybe Rich knows more about this, but the whole energy utility in Honduras and the mess it's in, the ambassador, our new ambassador, is very involved in making comments about how that should go. So I think that's what will be happening.
Well, we know that you'll be keeping your eye on it and reporting back to us on this. So Gary announced that on Saturday at midday, there's going to be a Zoom report back on the Witness for Peace hosted delegation to Honduras and Guatemala with those 4 members of Congress and the legislative director for Representative Schakowsky. And it's open to anyone who's interested. He put the link in the chat, so please check that out. Peggy, thanks you, Marianne, for your excellent summation. I think she speaks for all of us for the giving us a complete situation in Honduras. And thank you for all your work. There's a request to have access to the 20-minute video for show in our classroom. So maybe in a follow-up email, we can put that along with other next steps and resources.
I would like to, I'm going to put in the chat right now my email, and I would welcome anyone directly emailing me if that would be okay.
Okay.
For like that. Yep.
While you're doing that, Joe asked, what can you say about the announced campaign to be led by Vice President Harris to address root causes for the exodus from Honduras and Central America?
Well, I think I kind of answered that. I don't know. I can't keep track of the names of things, but President Biden, as Vice President Biden, was in charge of the Alliance for Prosperity. Was that what it was called? When they started calling it the Northern Triangle, which is very offensive to the Central Americans, for El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, from which the main numbers of migrants are coming to our southern border. The root causes, and he went there. I don't know if he went there, but he was in charge of that, and it did not bring prosperity, and it brought more of the same. And she did come to the inauguration. She was there for a short time, and she did meet with the new administration. It seems to me so far like they want to be appear very supportive and want to work with, and I'm sure that they do want to work with the new administration. How much of that will be listening, and how much of that will be telling what they'd like to see happen? Xiomara and her husband, when he was president, they were part of the elite class in Honduras. They were not the grassroots or social movement people, but something started to change in her husband's presidency, which is why there was a coup against him. And then they've had their own education the last 13 years of having been exiled, of having had to fight to come back into the country, of founding a new party, of joining in the streets in the opposition to the coup regimes. So I am sure that most of her heart is in the right place, but what she will be able to do, and with what she's left with, and with pressure from the United States, she I think really wants to have a good relationship with the United States, and I wonder if it's possible.
All right. Michelle asks, are there efforts underway to coordinate solidarity movements with activists in Guatemala and El Salvador? and possibly beyond Central America. As you mentioned, there is such strong resonance across these contexts and curious how to mobilize links systematically and transnationally.
What a wonderful question. There are several avenues that are working nationally here on Honduras, the Honduras Solidarity Network, and other rights action in Honduras, things like that. But what you're talking about is what we have in the past. SOA Watch has been very, very good at really linking, and we do still have a Latin America coordinator who is very conversant in SOA Watch, especially in Central America, especially in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. I would urge you to make contact with SOA Watch, but I wish there were a much more articulated movement like you're talking about. And this is why I'm talking with all of you and trying to get more people to even know that this is an issue, and what we have to do with it, what our responsibilities and our and therefore our commitments could be. Thank you for the question.
Angie asked, and you addressed this a bit, about, she wanted to know about the new ambassador to Honduras. Is she likely to be good? And she also commented that it's very disappointing that the Obama administration supported the coup. Did it offer any explanation or justification?
To my knowledge, it did not. I mean, the justification was that they did not call it a military coup. The justification was at least what was put in the media, which was patently false, but no one really wants to get into subtleties, was that because Zelaya, who was the president, Mel Zelaya, was going to have a referendum on whether there should be a constitutional assembly so that the people would vote to, should we have a vote on the constitutional, to have a constitutional assembly and look at changing our constitution, which that the Constitution was made in the 1980s under other dictatorships, and it is not a constitution of, for, and by the people in any way. So he wanted to see if the people wanted to have that, and it was twisted to say he wants to change the Constitution in order that he could have a second term, because presidents, according to the Constitution of Honduras, could only have one term. Well, he wasn't doing it for that reason. It would have been impossible to do it for that reason. And the irony is that that's exactly what Ho did. He created a coup to get rid of Mel for supposedly, wanting a second term. And then he went ahead and got himself a second term by both corruption and then stealing the election. So the justification, it wasn't really a justification given, but we didn't like, the United States didn't like Mel, and yes, felt maybe he was getting too socialistic, but there was no justification. That's just actually why.
All right, we're getting close to the end of this. I do want to let people know that Gary weighed in on the question of nationwide organizing and said the SOA Watch and Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective come closest as nationwide organizations that educate and mobilize the grassroots on Central America. And they are very active. You can find information about them and how to get involved. There were a couple requests to share your beautiful diagram, Marianne, with all of us, and it seems so universal. So if you could do that, that would be appreciated. And again, appreciation for your talk and how well done it was. And then, well, now there's, yeah, I think, oh, there's one more question. We'll make this be our final question. Barb asked, what's the current status of the new Congress and how likely are they to work with Xiomara Castro?
Well, it was very confusing at first. In between her election and the inauguration, there were two Congresses because there were two presidents of the Congress, and there was a whole wing that was saying that they were really in power in Congress and instead of her parties. And it was looking very, very fraught with conflict. That got ironed out in some way, I'm not quite sure, but Congress seems to be working pretty well with her so far. For instance, on the ZEDES, on the model cities issue, the Congress worked to repeal that framework. And also on getting the UN anti-corruption work started. So anything can happen at any time in Honduras. We've been waiting, when she was elected, it's like, will she live to be inaugurated? Will something happen in the meantime, a state of siege or something where, Ho will cancel everything and bring out the military in the street? Will she actually get inaugurated? And then would he go quietly when he was extradited? I mean, we don't know what is going to happen. There are strong, rich, or well-endowed financially forces at work. And so we'll see what happens. And corruption is still there. And how many even well-meaning people can become corrupted always surprises us, right?
Well, thank you so much, Marianne. I'm going to turn it over to Rich. But before I do, I just want to thank everyone for participating in this session and our other 4 sessions for those of you who are with us. Rich.
Well, thank you again so much, Marianne, for a really excellent, thorough presentation. And thanks to all of you, of course, for being here and participating and for your interest and continued solidarity. This is the last in this series for this year, but please do keep on top of ICPJ activities, icpj.org, and the Latin America Caucus, and stay tuned for future events. After this session, then those of us who are in the Latin America Caucus are going to stick around for a few minutes just for a brief meeting among ourselves. So again, thank you so much. Marianne, if you want to have any final words.
I very much would like to thank everyone for coming and for being so supportive. And I know I talked long and a lot of words, but believe me, there was so much more I could have said and I had to cut things out, but I'm glad that it resonated with some of you. And I'm just very happy that you came out tonight. Thank you so much.